was reported on Monday that Nassir Little will join the Heat this season on a one-year deal. What does his signing mean, and what does he bring to the table? Plus, the latest on Terry Rozier's progress on today's Locked On Heat.
You are Locked On Heat, your daily Miami Heat podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, welcome to Locked On Heat, your everyday podcast on the Miami Heat. Whether you're tuning in on YouTube, Odyssey, or your favorite podcast app, thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. I'm Wes Goldberg, editor at allyoucanheat.com, here with David Ramil. Both of us are credentialed Heat media members, and the best way to support the show is to leave a 5-star rating and review on your podcast app and subscribe on YouTube. Today's episode is sponsored by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Got a ton of stuff to get to today. We've got the big news buried in the Heat's press release about their New Jersey patches and a health update on Terry Rozier in a second. But let's start with the news that the Heat have signed Nassir Little to a one-year deal. He'll take the Heat's 15th and final roster spot in a bit of a surprising move for a few different reasons, David. Number one, the Heat didn't have enough space under the second tax apron to sign a 15th player to a guaranteed deal. So when you and I talked about the Heat working out Nassir Little a couple weeks ago, we said, yeah, that's cool. But unless he's willing to take a training camp contract, we don't see a way that the Heat can fit him without going into that second luxury tax. And with all of the restrictions, with the roster building restrictions that come with being a second cap team, it just didn't feel like a guy like Nassir Little was worth crossing that apron for. So we'll get to that here in a second. So that was the first reason why it was a little surprising. The second reason is Nassir Little hasn't been very good for most of his career. 25th pick in the 2019 draft, but hasn't really made a mark on the NBA. Not a very good three-point shooter. Doesn't really do anything at an NBA level of note, although some of the physical tools are there. We're going to kind of get into all these things, but what was your sort of first reaction when you saw the news?
Very surprised, as you said, just because if they were going to go out of their way to sign a player, it felt like it would have been for somebody with either a lot more upside or somebody that was a little bit more ready-made and able to contribute in one aspect immediately. And I don't know that Nassir fits that mode right now. He just, like you said, he doesn't do anything at an exceptionally high NBA level. And so that being the case, it feels like they're kind of taking a risk here and playing some cap gymnastics in the hope that they could get something out of a player that hasn't shown a lot of potential or promise thus far in his NBA career. I don't mind it on the surface. Like, the cap issues, they are what they are. I don't know that there's another player available that might have made things a little bit better, with a veteran player that might have been a little bit more ready-made. That would have been a higher cap hit because as you become more and more a veteran in the NBA, your salary on a one-year minimum deal increases. And so maybe that was the rationale. He's still early enough in his NBA career where it wasn't such a significant cap hit. But still, overall, you see him, he's a little undersized at 6'5". Not that he's older, he's just 24 and a half, almost 25. But he just, he has some physical tools there. I wonder if they see him as potentially their next Caleb Martin. That's something I talked about in the last episode when we talked about the potential of signing Nassir, is that he's got these physical tools. He's just been in unstable situations or a bad team, or he hasn't really been coached at the same level and developed at the same level that Miami is historically known for. And maybe they feel they can bring out the best of him. And if that's the case, then as a wing player that can bring some physicality, that could add something into his three-point shooting, and that could provide some modicum of defense, I don't mind it necessarily. It's just hard to kind of see him being an impactful player right away.
He won't be, right? And I had the same thought as you had. I thought Caleb Martin, right? All the physical tools that you can ask for, right? But not really harnessed in the right way in previous stops. The Heat get Caleb Martin on a two-way contract, develop him, and then by the end of the season, he's on a standard roster spot. Nassir Little, 6'5" with a 7'2" wingspan, was considered a really high-end athlete coming out of that into the 2019 draft. And I think was pegged by most people as a potential lottery pick, and then just slid down draft boards. And there's a lot of reasons for that. I think there's questions about his three-point shooting, questions about his health overall, none of which have, by the way, been answered so far in his NBA tenure. He's a 32% 3-point shooter on low volume. He's a bad 3-point shooter. Statistically one of the worst 3-point shooters in the league based on the low volume and the low percentage. And he's played over the last 5 seasons 45, 54, 42, 48, and 48 games. Now, not all of that is health related. Some of that is just the fact that he's had a hard time cracking the rotation. Phoenix signed him to like this kind of crazy 3-year deal last year and then waived and stretched him earlier this summer because they figured like this guy just doesn't have a spot on our roster. You can't crack a pretty shallow Phoenix rotation. You're not cracking the Heat's rotation on day one. But like you said, this isn't a day one move. This is a developmental move for the Miami Heat. I think Nassir Little couldn't sign a 2-way contract because he's been in the NBA too long, and there's restrictions into how long players could be in the NBA and if they can or cannot sign 2-ways. So he wasn't eligible for a 2-way. This is kind of like a shadow 2-way, the way I'm kind of looking at it. So we can kind of get into the cap gymnastics part of this now. I guess Andy Ellsberg, who like a few years ago, remember like Dion Waiters, James Johnson, all those guys, he like re-signed them all, getting under the luxury tax because he found this loophole with like unlikely bonuses. Well, basically found a new loophole to keep from crossing over into that second apron, which is if the contract is non-guaranteed, then you don't technically cross over into the apron until you've paid out that money to the player that would otherwise take you over that second apron, right? So I guess technically teams don't get penalized for being an apron team until the end of any season, right? So you don't have to pay your tax bill until the end of the season. You don't pay your tax bill up front. You pay it at the end of the meal, not at the start of the meal. So if Nassir Little's contract was guaranteed, well, then it wouldn't have mattered because it's guaranteed. You got to pay him the money, whether or not you waive him or whatever, you got to pay him the money because it's a guaranteed contract. But by virtue of them signing him to a non-guaranteed or even a partially guaranteed contract, that money doesn't come out of the bank until you pay it. And so basically Nassir Little, and this is from ESPN's Bobby Marks, is making like 13 grand a game or a day or whatever it is. And so you kind of prorate that, blah, 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 math, punch it into the calculator. The Heat have until January 7th to either waive Nassir Little and stay under the second luxury tax or make another sort of payroll reducing move that gets them under the tax enough where they don't have to worry about it. And so their options they have a couple of options between now and January 7th. It's not a long time. It's kind of half the season, but maybe that's enough time that they figure like, you know what, let's give Nassir Little this much time to at least see what he can do.
Yeah, I think you can kind of, by that point, you'll at least be able to determine his level of work ethic, whether or not there are tools there and whether or not he's embraced Heat culture and Heat teaching. And I think that's a big part of it. It's almost as much as what's between the ears and what's in his chest rather than anything he actually does on the floor, because we've seen the Heat kind of take a chance.
Is that painted on the court?
It could be.
It could be. That was
and
pretty
I'd
good.
like to be paid
that
for
was pretty
it.
Good. Yes, that's right. That's right. You want your royalties.
I think they want to see whether or not they can mold this player, and they've taken a chance like this before. So I it's hard not to like the deal because you're looking at potentially the next great story in terms of Heat development and everything that they've done, and whether or not Heat culture can save another soul in the NBA spectrum and everything else like that. So there's a lot to kind of appreciate about it, but it's just also, I kind of just feel like taking a wait and see approach because, well, what we've seen over 4 years hasn't been very good. So we kind of have to wait to see whether or not he's been any better or he can get any better. And I'm not so sure that that's possible, but there's the potential there. I mean, he's got the physical tools. He's cheaper than an older veteran, and he's got enough NBA knowledge, however, so that you're not kind of training him up as much as you would be these guys that they have on two-way contracts that are basically 1 year or two away from being undrafted.
Right, like Keyshawn Johnson, we love him. We have no idea if he's an NBA player. We know what we think, but we don't know for sure. And we, by the way, that's not to say that Nassir Little for sure is an NBA player, but you're taking multiple bites at the apple here at a position of need, right? Like Caleb Martin walks away, and yes, you've got Jimmy Butler, but his minutes are what his minutes are going to be. You've got to replace 28 to 30 minutes a game, and one of your guys in your closing lineup. With Caleb Martin now playing for the 76ers, Jaime Jaquez Jr. definitely going to be part of that equation. Haywood Highsmith is going to have his shot to soak up those minutes. But you want multiple guys, especially on the wing. Keyshawn Johnson's on a two-way contract. Even if he becomes this great guy, the Heat are going to have a hard time playing him because you have limits to how many games you can play. And you're not eligible for the playoffs on a two-way contract, right?
To me, it comes down to two players that have to either impress or make Nassir Little superfluous, and that's Alec Burks as a veteran shooter and scorer, although again they play a different position in theory, and I think and their roles would be different. I think it depends on whether or not Burks can continue to be a competent scorer, and I have no reason to doubt that he is. But I think it falls mainly on Josh Richardson because while he saw a lot of minutes at point guard last year and he was starting to develop, as much as it's a feel-good story to bring back Rook 2, at the same time, he's got lingering injury issues because of the dislocated shoulder last season. You don't know if he's going to be fully healthy and available, or if it's going to be a slow progress, or if there's the potential for another injury down the road. And you want to have somebody that's at least familiar rather than having to scour the waiver wire at some point down the season and maybe bring in somebody at that point. So that's why you get him in now, get him in through a full training camp, let him understand what Heat culture is all about, develop him early and start seeing whether or not there's enough there. And it's not to say they can't keep all three guys and make some other kind of move. I even theorized to you that the New York Knicks are desperately in need of a center. Does that mean the end of Thomas Bryant's tenure in Miami? If I was New York, I'd know I'd certainly be calling. And I know that you pointed out Thomas can't be traded until sometime later on in the season, but at least it's something that would, it would at least clear cap space early on so that you could keep Nassir on the roster.
Right.
And Thomas Bryant may be out of the center rotation with the addition of Khalil Ware and the re-signing of Kevin Love too. So you've got a lot of different players and options there. And Miami can continue to have a player that they feel comfortable in and develop. We'll have to see if it pans out.
This definitely could be a move, or it certainly will be a move that begets another move. Whether or not that second move is just waiving Nassir Little in early January or making some other sort of payroll reducing move. But it's clear that the Heat are looking at the roster right now as something that's not finished right now. And that might be a dramatic change, or it might be as simple as, again, just waiving Nassir Little in the first week of January. But it's certainly not going to be what it is now at the end of the season. The Heat have a new jersey patch, but buried in that press release was some surprising news about the Heat's relationship with Klutch Sports. We'll talk about that. You're not going to want to miss it after this on Locked On Heat.
Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Game Time's got a new feature, in case you haven't seen it. It's called Game Time Picks, and it makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. Game Time Picks filters out all of the fluff to show you only the incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. Just picking an event, an upcoming game, a concert, a comedy show, whatever you're looking for tickets for, you'll find them on Game Time. And now Game Time has made it even easier to get the right prices, and you'll always find the all-in pricing. That's one of their great features. You know exactly what you're going to be paying. So you see the total upfront with no surprise fees at checkout. You've got their seat views feature, so you can get a panoramic view of your seat in the app so that you know exactly where you're going to be sitting before you hit the buy button. And their lowest price guarantee, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference if it's not the lowest price you can find. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA, and you get $20 off your first purchase. Now, terms do apply, but create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA, and you get $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It's game time. We'll be right back.
Thanks again for making Locked On Heat your first listen of the day. For your second listen, enjoy the Locked On NBA podcast. There's no offseason in the NBA, and Locked On NBA provides daily basketball analysis from national and local experts in 30 minutes or less. No one keeps you as informed or entertained as Locked On NBA. It's available on YouTube and wherever you get your podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Well, at 5 a.m. this morning, the Heat issued a press release announcing their new jersey patch partnership with Robinhood, who's going to take over for Carnival Cruise Lines as the official jersey patch for the Heat this season. But, David, that's not as interesting as this little bit buried in the press release. And you and I both noticed it. We were texting before we were recording. We both noticed the same thing in the press release. Down in the 7th paragraph of this press release is the following. Klutch Sports Group's Global Partnerships Division was hired to source and help facilitate the deal from start to finish. Quote, Robinhood's mission to make finance accessible was a strong fit with the Miami Heat's dedication to the community, culture, and excellence, making the partnership a natural choice, end quote, said Andrew Feinberg, head of Klutch Global Partnerships. Now, David, Klutch Sports.
Ooh.
The sports agency started and run by Rich Paul in 2012 is when it launched. Obviously, Rich Paul, the business partner and close friend of one LeBron James. We know that the relationship between Klutch Sports and Pat Riley hasn't been the best, right? We know Pat Riley has the agencies that he likes to deal with. He's good with Excel. We'll deal with CAA, no problem. But has basically not signed a Klutch client in 12 years, essentially.
Yeah.
And a part of that reasoning might be the fact that when Pat Riley walked into that meeting in the summer of 2014 with LeBron James, Rich Paul, and other representatives, executives from Klutch, he felt like the decision was already made before he walked into the room. He pitched LeBron James on a new vision coming off of that 2014 finals loss to the Spurs, how we were going to rebuild the team, asked LeBron James to take a pay cut in that meeting, and then was responded to with silence during that meeting.
Yeah.
And it didn't rub Pat Riley the right way. And he was publicly disappointed about it, talked to the media about how disappointed he was when LeBron James went to Cleveland and all these things. And he might have blamed Klutch for part of that decision for LeBron to return to the Cavaliers. So I do think, and you could disagree with me on this, but I think that it's been a little overstated, the rocky relationship between Pat Riley and Klutch. I think if there was like a no-brainer superstar, like if Damian Lillard was represented by Klutch, for instance, last year, I don't think that would have stopped Miami from at least chasing. And by the way, Klutch might have been better at directing Damian Lillard to where he wanted to go than Damian Lillard's agent. But I think it's been a little overstated, but you also can't disagree with the facts that they just haven't really dealt with them. So it very much at all. And so for them to not only deal with Klutch to get this Robin Hood partnership, but to shout them out in this press release in such a major way, giving a Klutch executive as much time and space in the release as the Robin Hood executive. I think this is and to say from start to finish, they were involved in this thing, that giving them responsibility. This was a full-throated endorsement of Klutch and how they helped the Heat negotiate this jersey patch partnership. After last year, they couldn't even do it, so they had to revert to Mickey Harrison's company and just put the Carnival Cruise Lines on the jersey patch. I think this is a pretty major thing. What do you think?
Major feels like it's overstating it yet another way. Like that the pendulum can't swing in both directions too far for in either direction. But in line with the classic Locked On Heat game of something or nothing, this is definitely
deal,
something.
No deal.
I think, I think it feels like this is the beginning of a reparation here that probably has taken Miami out of some potential moves or some potential deals just because their comfort level hasn't been there. And if they can start to rebuild this, and if they've started the process of rebuilding it over the summer, it bodes well for the future because now you've got an established connection there. Now, remember in 2014, it was all smiling faces and hidden agendas. And that wasn't just about LeBron. It was about Rich Paul and everybody else. That's a public slap in the face that I'm sure neither party got over right away. And so 10 years later, if you can start to kind of get past that, kind of look at each other as opportunists and looking to improve each other in one way or help each other in one way. Like, Klutch is looking to move their clients sometimes. And guess what? There's a potential Klutch client in Chicago, right? Zach LaVine, isn't he represented by Klutch as well?
We got some potential Klutch clients that I want to get to. We'll get to the speculative part. Don't you worry, David. I got my list ready to go. But you're right. And I think the Heat are already helping them kind of grease the wheels with their own clients. They signed Alec Burks in June. The first Klutch client that they had signed, and again, in a decade. And so there's definitely an olive branch being reached out this summer. And I know the Heat haven't accomplished a whole lot this summer, but maybe the greatest accomplishment is bridging that gap, burying whatever hatchet may or may not have existed. My point here is I don't want to overstate. I don't want to overstate and by the way, the Alec Burks, like front offices do this all the time. Hey, we've got one extra roster spot. It's the 14th guy on the roster. Probably not going to play that much anyway, but let me help you out. Let me sign your client. And now you're represented on our roster and you have a reason to talk now. Like the Heat have a reason to talk to Klutch beyond just the Robin Hood partnership. They have a reason to talk to Klutch because they have a client on their roster. They have a reason to be in touch with his agency. And that is a big deal.
But typically that's reserved for like already players that are already on the roster represented by either an agency or a client or a particular agent that you already have an established relationship with. Like let's say Mark Barlstein, who represents a couple of guys in the Heat roster. Like that's an established partnership. Mark could say to the Heat and say, you know what? Hey, I've got X veteran. You want to bring him on board? He's looking for an opportunity, etc. Yeah, we'll do you a solid next time negotiations comes up. You keep that in mind, etc. These things happen all the time. This is kind of a typical in the sense that there's no Klutch or a player on the current roster, and yet they still went out of
It's
their
an
way,
olive branch.
reached out to Clutch, or maybe Clutch reached out to the Heat. I'm curious to see how that played out.
Yeah, I mean, either way, it is the olive branch, right? And so, again, don't mean to overstate or understate or whatever the relationship between Pat Riley and Clutch and how rocky it was. Again, I still maintain the idea that if there was a no-brainer home run slam dunk player out there represented by Clutch that wanted to come to Miami, they would have buried that hatchet however many years ago it took. But, guys like DeJounte Murray, who were out there, the Heat chose Terry Rozier over DeJounte Murray. Now, I don't know how much that had to do with just the independent negotiations between the Hornets and the Hawks, or Clutch was involved at all. I have no idea, and I don't mean to speculate on it. I'm just telling you, they've had opportunities to chase guys like Zach LaVine, DeJounte Murray, whoever it was, and kind of just haven't for a lot of different reasons. Now, I would argue the Zach LaVine thing is mostly because of his health issues and his owner's contract more than who his agency is. But nonetheless, you can't deny the fact that the Heat have passed up time after time a chance to acquire even, fringe all-star caliber kind of players, the ones that we're talking about. Now, there's an all-NBA player that I want to talk to here in a second. But the point being, though, I think this is the part with, regardless of speculation, the relationship between Clutch and the Miami Heat has never been stronger than it is right now. That is a fact.
That's an overstatement.
You think? Since LeBron. Since LeBron.
Okay.
I should have clarified.
Though.
You're absolutely right. Yeah. Since LeBron left, the relationship between Clutch and the Heat has never been stronger than it is right now.
That's fair. And I think it bodes well.
That could open some doors. Doors that we'll talk about here after this.
Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return over on FanDuel. That's America's #1 sportsbook for a number of reasons. When you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats. You can view live play-by-play and so much more on the same page where you place your actual bets. And you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Make sure to go check it out. Make sure to go visit right away. FanDuel.com. We'll be right back.
Thanks again for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. If you're new to us on YouTube, hit that subscribe button. You can also follow us on your favorite podcast app. We'll get to the Terry Rozier news here in a second, but follow up on my tease there. So if this has opened up a door, the new relationship between Heat and Clutch, if this has opened up a door going forward, there are 3 guys currently Clutch clients who can be available within the next calendar year or so that I think could make sense for the Miami Heat. The first one is Fred VanVleet, right? Player option next year, currently playing at point guard for the Houston Rockets. Player option next year, unclear what his future is. Might be an option there if the Heat want to negotiate some sort of sign and trade, whatever. Could be a double sign and trade. VanVleet here. If Jimmy Butler opts out and wants to go to Houston, not to speculate more on the Jimmy Butler situation, whatever. He's out there. The other one is Darius Garland, who the Cavs have decided not to trade for now. I think they want to try it. I think they want to try the Darius Garland, Donovan Mitchell backcourt under a new coach. They just hired Kenny Atkinson, fired Bickerstaff before. So let's see what it looks like under a new coach. And if they decide, you know what, still not viable, maybe we shop one of them. They're obviously committed to Donovan Mitchell. If they were going to trade one, it seems like it would at least be Garland for now. So maybe he's something that's out there closer to the February trade deadline. So that's an option. Unless you've got a note on Garland, I want to tell you the one that I'm really looking at here.
Oh, I know who it is, but I'm curious.
It's De'Aaron Fox. It's De'Aaron Fox, who is represented by Klutch, went to school with Bam Adebayo, who the team is clearly building around going forward, and is eligible for an extension right now and won't sign it. And this is the exact same situation we were talking about potentially playing out with Donovan Mitchell in Cleveland. Of course, Mitchell signed his extension. But if he didn't, there was going to be questions about whether or not he was convinced that his future was in Cleveland. Well, this exact scenario is playing out to lesser headlines in Sacramento. De'Aaron Fox not committing to that extension. The Athletic in June reported that Fox has decided not to sign an extension this year, in part because he wants to see how the Kings roster takes shape for the long haul. And I know they added DeMar DeRozan and they did a couple of different other things. I don't think anything is selling. I don't think those things sell De'Aaron Fox on the long-term vision of Sacramento and wanting to sign a long-term contract extension with the Sacramento Kings. I think the Heat have their eye on De'Aaron Fox, would be my goal. And that, I don't think that's like report. I don't want that to get aggregated as like reporting breaking news. The Heat, as we know, monitor all the superstars and whether or not they're going to force their way out. That's just what they do. But De'Aaron Fox makes a lot of sense if they were looking for their next target.
Yeah, I think it's a good call, and it does make a lot of sense because there's the kind of buildup and hype that was surrounding Donovan for a long time. One, because he was traded to Cleveland, right, a team that nobody has ever signed with and nobody likes signing with, and there was all these kind of different narratives about there. Plus, had already been traded once, and not necessarily to his own destination. He didn't have the kind of foundation of being there with a team that drafts you and things of that sort. So a lot of people wondering, oh, does he want to go back to New York? Does he want to play alongside his friend Bam Adebayo in South Florida, et cetera? There were a lot of different teams that were like available and willing to take on Donovan Mitchell and engage in kind of contract extensions talks with him. But unfortunately, those never manifested. He wound up re-signing his extension, obviously, in Cleveland. But when it comes to Fox, I mean, this is an all-star caliber player. The connection is there. He's talked highly of Bam and the Heat in the past, and he's already dropped like little Easter eggs here. If you're looking for those kinds of things, he has already mentioned the Heat of being a world-class organization, a team that gets the most out of its players, etc. That's the kind of thing that if you're looking for future transactions or potential transactions, you froth at the mouth off, because it's just, well, I mean, to hear other players talk about an organization like that kind of shows you how highly regarded and well-respected they are, and how he that personally holds the team in such high regard. So I think it's a great sign, and you just want to be part of the conversation. You don't want to exclude yourself. You don't want to sit at the kids' table while Sacramento and Klutch is talking with, who knows what other teams, the Lakers or somebody else or whatever other team is out there lining up for De'Aaron's potential services. Miami now has a seat at the big boys' table. They can go ahead and enter negotiations if it comes down to that. And that's huge. This is hugely speculative. There's a lot of dominoes that have to fall in the egg basket before you can start doing it. But at the same time, I think all these pieces are connected. And it kind of shows for a lot of fans that really haven't had a lot of faith in this front office. It shows a bigger picture, and maybe a bigger picture approach in terms of manifesting these things, building these relationships up again, and kind of being on the ground floor so that you're not completely excluded when and if the next potential superstar becomes available. And I got to say, Sacramento's future, despite the addition of DeRozan, I know it looks great on paper, that does not necessarily guarantee them anything. The Western Conference is a bloodbath. Sacramento could be a very good team, but they missed the playoffs last year. They could miss it again this year, despite adding DeRozan. You've got Sabonis there. You've got Fox there. Aside from that, who are the player? Keegan Murray, I guess that's part of your long-term core. You had DeRozan. He's more of a short-term addition, and who knows how good he's going to continue to be over the twilight years of his career. There's no guarantee that they make the playoffs. Fox could become disenfranchised with the Kings' rebuilding plan almost immediately, or at some point at this season. And if he starts demanding a trade, maybe even next offseason, I don't see why Miami wouldn't get a call.
Well, next offseason feels like when it would start, because he's extension eligible now. He needs to kind of sign that extension going into what would be a contract year next year. So I don't think he wants to go into a lame duck season. You're absolutely right. And I think that I like the Sacramento Kings. I enjoy watching them quite a bit, mostly because I really enjoy watching De'Aaron Fox. The partnership that he has with Domantas Sabonis is awesome. Like, that offensive combination is great. But those guys are negative defenders. They have a clear ceiling as to what it is that they can do. Unless Keegan Murray turns into this like all-star caliber player, which I like Keegan Murray fine. I don't know that that's necessarily the expectation for him. It just feels like they don't really have a way, when you're built around guys like Sabonis and Fox, to get to that next level. But if you replace Sabonis with Bam, who is the defensive anchor, who also offers all those same playmaking things in the pick and roll that Sabonis does, then you kind of just take the fault in the Fox Sabonis build, and you kind of get rid of it with Bam, because you could build the defense around him. And now you can kind of surround those guys with better players, and not necessarily guys that need to cover up for those weaknesses. So and Fox is really smart. I covered him for a little bit his first couple of years in the league when I was living out there in the Bay Area. He's a really smart cat. Like, that guy knows what's up. And I think he sees these things and he says, you know what? This might be the better spot for me. Plus, like you said already, the East is a little bit more open than the West.
Yeah. And he has a chance for his own individual brand to build at I think a higher level, being a part of the Miami Heat and in the Eastern Conference rather than Sacramento. Like, it's not that Sacramento's a bad team. Like you mentioned, they're fun to watch, but like, they're a West Coast team. How many people in the East stay up till 10:30 to catch a Kings Blazers game, or something like that? There's a lot more opportunity to be on TV, to build your brand, to be recognized as a star, to maybe even crack an all-star game here. There's a lot of different things that could happen. Luka Doncic isn't going anywhere. for him. He could eclipse Tyrese Maxey pretty easily as an all-star in the Eastern Conference. So I think that's a great opportunity. Easily, you don't think so?
No, easily. Fox is a way better player than Terry Rozier.
Okay, that's okay. That's what.
Yeah, I mean, he already made an All-Star game 2 years ago in the Western Conference and an All-NBA spot.
Right.
Like that guy. When we talk about De'Aaron Fox, we're not talking about an All-Star player. We're talking about an All-NBA caliber player. That's the kind of talent that we're talking about. And Klutch, man, like came up big in those playoffs against the Warriors a couple years ago before he broke his finger. All right, let's get to the Terry Rozier news. The Miami Herald reported that he was recently cleared to play 5-on-5 basketball. He's expected to be ready to take part in training camp next week after spending the summer rehabbing from his neck injury. Great news, David. We talked a lot about some of the cloudiness around the Terry Rozier injury stuff and whether or not he was ready to play 5-on-5 or not and whatever. A couple of weeks ago, he said, I'm almost ready to play 5-on-5. Now, according to the Herald, he is playing. He is cleared to play 5-on-5. Obviously, that's good news.
Yeah, I mean, again,
we believe it.
More cloudiness. Yeah, I know. I guess I have no choice if he's saying it, but like already, this is like the flip flop of the century here taking place over the course of this summer. Like the start of the summer was like, I feel great. I'm renewed. I'm too bad I couldn't be there in the playoffs. Then a few weeks later, I'm not sure if I'm ready to play yet. I got to get cleared. No, I'm cleared again. Right? Fortunately, a week before the start of the camp, almost to the day. So
miraculous.
Yeah, I believe it. It just feels like this has been such an up and down and very nebulous kind of roller coaster where we haven't really been kept informed of what's been going on. So I'm curious whether or not the Heat or Terry himself will reveal everything that's taken place up to this point. But for now, I'm looking at it with great optimism. He's excited about it. Among the quotes that he gave the Herald were that he's looking forward to a full camp. This is a new start. He's going to continue being the aggressive player he's always been, which, that's kind of live by the three, die by the three sort of thing. But it could work out for Miami anyway, because they do need that kind of score. So I'm looking at it as an optimistic thing. We've talked a lot about Terry and his potential impact and the fact that he's getting like this full season with Miami where he can understand his place in the hierarchy from day one. There's no trying to fit in. There's no kind of, softening egos or anything like that, or worrying whether or not you have to, make dimes to everybody else. No, you can go out and get yours and still find your place in this hierarchy. And I think it works a lot towards his advantage and for Miami's in general. So I'm excited to see what Rozier brings to the table, and hopefully he can stay in continued health, because obviously that's a huge factor for Miami. If he can be the player that he's capable of being at the highest level and he fits in well in Miami, can stay healthy, well, I think the sky's the limit for the team.
I still want to see him on the court before I believe anything.
Oh, man. Yeah. If he stinks badly over the next 2 weeks, who knows? Maybe he'll miss all of the preseason.
Setbacks, etc., whatever. I still want to see him on the court before I believe anything. Thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Like, comment, and subscribe on YouTube. Follow us on your favorite podcast app.